We now have our final panel. With 1 year to go until the finalization of the insurance capital standard, I am pleased to welcome to the stage Paolo Cadoni, Chair of the IAIS Capital Solvency and Field Testing Working Group. He will give opening remarks before the panel joins the stage. Over to you, Paolo.
Good afternoon, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here in Tokyo and to talk about something which has been taking quite a lot of my life over the last 10 years. I mean, the ICS. I mean, just to give you just to start, I mean, we started our work in 2013 and to develop the Insurance Capital Standard, or ICS, as a group consolidated capital standard as a part of to be considered as the quantitative element of ConFrame. Since then, we have carried out 6 years of field testing involving between 40 and 50 volunteer groups around the world, 4 years of monitoring the ICS, 4 public consultations, and the last consultation closed in September 2023. This process provided the IAIS with lots of quantitative and qualitative data to inform the development of a firm, evidence-based framework for the supervision of international active insurance groups. The latest version, which we refer to as a candidate ICS as a PCR, is the result of this journey and the penultimate milestone towards the adoption of the ICS in 2024. Going back to what we have done over the last few years, starting from 2018, the first stable version of the ICS, which we call version 2.0, has been used now for over 4 years during the monitoring period. We will start in preparation for the 5th and final year of the monitoring period. We plan adoption in end of 2024. And the ICS 2.0 was intended to be a stable version to monitor the performance of the ICS over the cycle. The experience we collected for the ICS over these years has shown that actually the ICS, this stable version, works quite well, but at the same time, the experience shows also that there was a need for some adjustment. Therefore, I mean, we're moving with a consultation issued in June to what we called the candidate ICS as a PCR, which embeds this adjustment. I'm talking more specifically adjustment to the valuation, and what I mean is to the market-adjusted valuation which we use for the discounting of liabilities, and are mainly related to the eligibility criteria for the middle bucket, but also for the calculation of the spread adjustment to the discounting yield curves. We introduce changes also to the capital resources, more specifically to the introduction of limits for minority interest, and we made also a few adjustments with respect to the criteria for financial instrument with call features. On the capital requirement side, we introduced a differentiated treatment for infrastructure, equity, and debt. We also introduced a countercyclical dampener for equity risk, and we revised the calculation for life risks. We also simplified the treatment of tax, and last but not least, we also introduced internal models for the calculation of capital requirements. These in practice mean that in their implementation, jurisdiction may allow for the use of internal model subject to terms and conditions. And the last thing we did also with respect to it was about the gap with adjustment, or gap plus. We parked it for the moment, but we will reconsider at some point in the future if there is an interest for that. But in talking about the consultation, the last consultation, the 4th consultation at the IAIS, which closed on the 21st of September, there were 78 questions, which spanned along 22 themes, from adjustment, from valuation, capital resources, capital requirements, and internal models. We received 40 responses, and from 15 different jurisdictions. Most of the responses were about the economic impact assessment, though there were lots of questions also about internal models, valuation, and capital resources. What we are doing at the moment, we are currently reviewing the responses submitted by stakeholders. And what we will do at the end of this process, we'll consider the comments received together with the results of the economic impact assessment and the outcome from the final year of the monitoring period to see whether final adjustments are needed. And with this in mind, we plan to move to adoption at the end of next year, in December 2024 in Cape Town. So we would welcome you to see, hopefully to see the final results of that next year in Cape Town during the annual conference. And this concludes my intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo, for highlighting the significant steps that are being taken to finalize the ICS. Now, I am pleased to welcome to the stage the panel of the final session. Over to you, Romain.
Yes, thank you very much. And from my side, also a great pleasure to be moderating this panel on the ICS. I must say I have devoted a bit less of my life to the ICS, but still, I believe, quite a significant part. So it's a great pleasure. And I have a dream group of panelists, leaders of the IAIS Executive Committee, that will share their perspectives on the recent development of the ICS, as highlighted by Paolo, but of course also the steps that we still need to go through before the finalization of the ICS, and also the perspective of what's come next in terms of the implementation of this global standard for internationally active insurance groups. So I believe I don't need to do further introduction to about the panelists. And I would like to kick off now so we can also get some time left for questions from the audience, and I'm sure there will be plenty of them. I would like first to turn to you, Vicky, past chair of the Executive Committee and of the ICS Task Force. And so you actually, a few days ago, chair your last ICS Task Force. And I think we would like to hear from you at this stage. What is your assessment on the progress and where the IAIS stands in this long journey toward the IAIS and the perspective going forward?
Yes, thanks very much, Paolo, and thank you for having me on the panel. As you said, and as I briefly reported during the town hall yesterday, on Tuesday, we had the first ICS task force meeting post the preliminary analysis of the consultation responses that Paolo just set out. We are on track on the timetable that we set out in 2019 in Abu Dhabi. As you know, and as has been said quite a few times already, in June we published the consultation paper of the candidate ICS as PCR. In that consultation, there were also a number of questions about the economic impact of the ICS to inform the economic impact assessment analysis, which together with the rest of the consultation questions is going to determine the adjustments EXCO might decide to make to the ICS in order to finalize it as a PCR and for the for basically in the AGM for the members to adopt it as a PCR in December in Cape Town. Another thing that we did, again, in line, in accordance with the timeline, is we looked at the responses that we had received for the economic impact assessment, and we had a preliminary discussion. And we discussed the work and the milestones that we have to make between now and December in order to deliver. There's quite a lot of work to do, but as I mentioned again yesterday, it needs to be front-loaded because the volunteer groups are going to get the last templates for the 5th iteration of the monitoring period in March, which will then be launched publicly in June. So in order for that to be decided at EXCO in March, we need to do a lot of work between now and then. And in parallel to the work that is being led by the Capital Insolvency and Field Testing Working Group chaired by Paolo, and of course any issues that cannot be resolved at the level of the PDC, which is chaired by Matt, will come up to the ICS task force. So we have quite a lot of work to do between now then and March. But we've got the meetings in the diary, very good project plan, so I'm confident that we can go through it. Just to say, in order to set expectations, given how tested this standard is, this candidate standard is, I mean, obviously, that's why we consult. We're going to look at the comments, but there isn't kind of an enormous window of making radical changes to it. We are closing it. We are closing it down. We're narrowing it down in order to deliver. But of course, we will consider it carefully and we will make the necessary adjustments.
Yes, thank you very much, Vicky, and certainly a lot of work going on. And I think another item that was, of course, discussed as the ICS task force is the comparability assessment. I don't know if you want to say a few words about the also your assessment in terms of the comparability assessment.
Yes, the comparability assessment is a different work stream in the sense that it's been led by the assessment team, which is a team of technocrats that has been assembled with a lot of experience either on the ICS and the development of the ICS, but also on the aggregation method in the sense that they understand also the underlying building blocks of the aggregation method and the specifications in the provisional ICS that went into the templates. This group is chaired by Jonathan as Secretary General to ensure, and this setup is to ensure that the work is entirely credible and technocratic. And what happened on Tuesday is we received a first update on the data that the assessment team has received and its completeness and the work that they're doing on this. And then we discussed the type of analytical presentation and tools that we will need as an ICS task force, because the impact assessment, the assessment team reports to the ICS task force, does not go through the CFWG, the PDC, and so on. Will need to be done so that we can make the final decisions. Again, we are on track for this, which is terrific. It's going to be a lot of work, and I'm sure there are going to be some tricky discussions, but we are totally on track.
Thank you very much, Vicky. And I would like to ask you a question, but now speaking to you with your Bank of England hat on. And would like to ask you whether you could share an update about the UK plans for the implementation of the ICS.
Yes, on the UK, we are in the middle, actually, of consulting on what we call Solvency UK, but it's basically the UK adjustments to Solvency II, which are by no means very radical. I mean, there are a lot of work, which is being done by my team. So I'm sure that they look very radical to the team, given the amount of work. But in a big picture sense, they're not radical. There are adjustments to the market-adjusted valuation, group consolidated Solvency II that maintains most of the elements. So in that sense, it's philosophically, very consistent, of course, with the ICS. We have done quantitative analysis. I mean, our groups, our IAIGs have participate in the ICS exercises, and we have done quantitative analysis on the candidate ICS, and we're pretty confident, and indeed that's what we have said publicly, that Solvency UK could be an adequate implementation of the ICS. However, the ICS has not yet been finalised, and we need to be absolutely sure that this is the case with granular and very specific data. In the event that it's not the case, we have also committed that we are going to adjust Solvency UK, and we have told the market that, so that the IAGs are fully compliant with the ICS. Post our exit from the European Union, we have developed, indeed it was developed in my area, so I know it quite well, the sort of framework onto which we would be doing prudential regulation on our own rule-making functions. And one very important pillar of that framework is compliance with international standards. So this is basically the common line across all our policy-making framework post-Brexit. So we shall definitely follow it.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and certainly good to hear. I would like now to turn to Shigeru. Shigeru, you are the new executive committee chair, and in this capacity, you are also the chair of the ICS task force. In your opening remarks yesterday, you mentioned the word continuity in terms of the way you see your leadership, and how does it apply to what we do on the ICS?
Yes, thank you, Roman. I think the point that I mentioned about continuity does make sense. Of course, Vicky has witnessed it for the last 8 years. I've witnessed it for the last 2 years. And I know, and I think all member jurisdictions are quite aware of the effort, resources, the commitment we have placed in this very comprehensive exercise. And I think, as Vicky mentioned, we have been able to narrow down what we do. Of course, as I mentioned yesterday, the last mile is not always the easiest mile. So we need to think through, as Vicky mentioned, we need to front load some of the works that we need to do. We also need to coordinate all the exercises that have been going on to enable a comprehensive package by the end of next year. And this requires, of course, how do we take forward ICSS PCR? How do we enable a appropriate economic impact assessment? And also, last but not least, to ensure a proper comparability assessment between ICS and the aggregation method. So those are the three things that we need to work together, very closely coordinated, and to very much ensure that there's very close communication among interested jurisdictions, which I think would be the key to finalize this very comprehensive work of the IAIS. And I look forward to being a part of that, and I'm very much committed in making this final last mile a constructive one.
Thank you very much, Shigeru. And if I now ask you a question in your, with your Japan FSA hat on, could you speak about the implementation of the ICS in Japan?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Roman. And I think I have previously mentioned about how we are taking forward. We are committed to introduce the ICS in 2025 right now, and we are on track with that. Of course, The ICS, as PCR, has not been finalized to its detail, so we need to sort of move forward looking at what's happening on the ICS front. But as timeline-wise, we are very much committed to introduce the ICS from fiscal year 2025 for Japanese firms. I'd also like to mention a little bit on the technicals. We already have a good sense on the standardized model, although there are still some details to be firmed out, and it closely tracks the specification of the ICS itself. And we are also studying carefully about the use of internal models, which will be phased in starting from NatCat risk. So those are the developments on the model front. We also have already clarified some of the requirements on the issuer's internal validation function related to the what we call the ESR, the Economic Value-Based Solvency Regulation. And we are working on further details on that, and we are also studying the framework for external validation. Last but not least, we are calibrating the details of the ladder of supervisory interventions, and it will be built upon our current system in principle, but we may make some changes while considering the nature of the ESR. So that's where we are right now. We are firmly committed on working towards implementing the ICS, reflecting, of course, the domestic situation in Japan. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shigeru. Great to hear. Now we are continuing our world tour, and now we are moving to the US with you, Gary. I would like to first ask you a question about what is the status update on the development of the aggregation method in the US. And then maybe also collect your perspective on the comparability assessment. Vicky has reported on the steps that we have done so far, but happy to hear also from your perspective on that.
Yeah, sure, Roman. Thank you. I'm happy to discuss both. And I think Vicky did a very good job of summarizing where we are, that we are on track. And as I look out, I see that some open seats. So it is truly just the insurance geeks that remain on this Friday. So kudos to us for staying. I do think that I know for myself, and we deserve maybe some sake and a night out in the bowels of the city, maybe with some karaoke, although I've heard that the bar has been set very high with karaoke by our MPC chair. So we've got some work to do tonight, which I'm happy to engage in. So on your actual question, though, Ramon, I'm happy to discuss it. First, let me just say that I and U.S. colleagues are pleased with where we are in the process, the development of the framework, and I'll step through some of the progress if you'll bear with me. The launch of the comparability assessment for the AM does mark another important milestone for the global insurance sector in the development of a risk-based insurance capital standard. And I know we've all heard today the IAIS is committed that the AM comparability assessment will be, as you said, a robust technical evidence-based analysis of whether the AM is an outcome equivalent approach for implementation of the ICS as a prescribed capital requirement. So to that end, the IAIS is currently analyzing the 2023 data collections submitted for the AM and the ICS. And we do remain confident that the criteria published by the IAIS in March provide a viable and fair path for the AM to be deemed comparable to the ICS. And just to step back, as I did a little bit when we were in Seattle, about some of the history and background to this. As we look back to the Kuala Lumpur Agreement in 2017, what it did is it acknowledged the ongoing development of the aggregation method within the United States and committed the IAIS to collect data from interested jurisdictions so that the IAIS, could be in a position by the end of the monitoring period to make the assessment. As state insurance regulators in the United States, we began actually developing an aggregation method in 2015, as you know. And our implementation of the group capital calculation, or otherwise known as the GCC, became embedded into our holding company model law in 2020. Over the years, state insurance regulators have held countless open meetings to discuss the development of our aggregation method. There were multiple exposure periods and opportunities for public consultation. We made refinements through extensive field testing. And extensive documentation has been published, which is, for anyone interested, it can be found on the NAIC's website. As many of you know, the development of the AM has been supported by state insurance regulators, by the NAIC staff, representatives of our colleagues at the Federal Reserve and the Federal Insurance Office, and supervisors from interested jurisdictions. As we've moved from Kuala Lumpur, the IAIS has continued to, we as a body have continued to repeat the support for our development of the aggregation method and have provided resources for the collection of data. And I would just stop to make a fine point on that, Ramon, that is a lot of work that has been done over the years by the IAIS Secretariat staff. As Vicky noted, it's a different work stream than the IAIS, than the ICS, but is very much appreciated by me, our U.S. colleagues. This has not been a light lift. That collection of data began on the AM in 2018. That was before the ICS version 2.0 was finalized. And now we're in incredibly, the 6th year of that data collection on the AM. There have been 2 public consultations related to the AM, one in 2020. That was on the draft definition of comparable outcomes and the 6 high-level principles. That was to inform the development of the criteria. And then last year, there was the consultation on the draft criteria itself to assess whether the AM provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. And then there have been, the IAIS has conducted 12 workshops specific to the AM. So again, I think this demonstrates just the amount of commitment that the leadership of the IAIS and the Secretariat have placed on the project. As to the data collection specifically and the development, it's expanded actually to include 21 insurance groups from 5 different countries. And as we committed when we reached agreement in Abu Dhabi, which goes down in the history books, it seems, as we refer to it all the time, we developed a process and a timeline for developing the criteria for the comparability assessment. All of the US IIGs have submitted AM data, along with other volunteer groups. Firms in other jurisdictions have also submitted data, and their supervisors have kindly aided in the development of the AM. And the AM data itself includes data that will be used by the IAIS in the comparability assessment. In particular, I would note the 2023 data collection packages that contain the detailed technical specifications, a questionnaire, and a template for both the ICS and the AM. And the data includes results for the provisional AM and for the candidate ICS as a PCR, which are the basis for the comparison, plus the results for the scenario analyses conducted on both the provisional AM and the candidate ICS. So collectively, this data will inform the evaluation of whether the comparability criteria have been met. And separately, the U.S. has developed and published documentation to provide additional detail about the AM and in support of the transparency and accountability our comparability assessment. As you're aware, Ramon, we published a level 1 document in November of 2020 to outline the overarching principles and concepts of the AM. It describes the provisional AM as well as the data collection. And then earlier this year, we produced a level 2 document, which builds on that level 1 document from 2020. and includes the data collection package that's released annually by the IAIS. So what it describes as level 2 are the principles for the AM approach and the provisional AM that is serving as the basis for the comparability assessment, and also the steps planned for the finalization of the AM. As to the assessment itself, which Vicky spoke to in some of the conversations that we had this week, we have indeed started that assessment. The statement that was issued last month outlined how the assessment will proceed in accordance with the assessment methodology, with the process and governance that agreed to by the IAIS earlier this year. And then by March 2024, the IAIS will be in ICS task force will be in a position to adopt a report to EXCO on the comparability work performed based on that 2023 data. Then in September 2024, which will come quickly, I am sure, the IAIS will issue a final comparability report reflecting the changes made to the ICS or the provisional AM. EXCO will then make a decision in December of 2024 as to whether the AM provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. So the work of the IAIS on AM data collection development of a definition of comparable outcomes and high-level principles and the finalization of the criteria for the comparability assessment highlights, I think, the consensus that we have maintained across our membership on a really important issue. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the resources that have been dedicated to the AM, not just by the US, but also by the IAIS and other interested jurisdictions, I think helps to ensure that we have a common understanding and a strong foundation for the comparability assessment. And throughout this process, we have received very useful feedback from stakeholders interested in the recognition of the AM, as well as the broader insurance sector. So I do want to thank those that have weighed in at all stages for your engagement. We look forward to continuing that engagement, to collaborate. I think the collective contributions to this work actually lend credibility to the comparability assessment with a view of fulfilling the Financial Stability Board's charge to develop a comprehensive, group-wide supervisory regulatory framework for IIGs, and that includes a quantitative capital standard. So with that, I would just say again, I very much appreciate, Ramon, the dedication and the leadership from Vicky to now to Shuguru, the collaboration with our colleagues Petra and IOPA, that put a lot of work in. Sometimes this and the ICS has stolen the oxygen out of the room, but really pleased with where we are at this point. So a touch long-winded, but I think that caught it all. Thanks, Ramon.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary, for your and also for flagging the amount of work that is done by IAIS members, by the Secretariat, but of course also by the volunteer group that do provide the data and with whom we have very fruitful technical discussions. I think everyone measure the amount of work and the dedication that has been put to ensure that we deliver a very robust standard, but also, of course, a very robust comparability assessment. And that's maybe at the price of not being so good at karaoke because of the time we are spending in data room. So thank you very much, Gary, for that. And then I would like to move, last but not least, to you, Petra. And I will ask you, of course, the question about the implementation of the ICS in the EU. You are currently doing a review of Solvency II, so maybe sharing with the audience how do you see the path toward the implementation of the ICS in the EU?
Yes, well, thank you, Romain, and hi everyone again on an ICS panel. Where are we in the EU? Briefly, for those who are less familiar with how EU comes to a new reviewed Solvency II directive, it means that all the member states have to agree in the Council on a text, the Parliament has to agree on a text, and the starting point of those two agreements is a proposal of the Commission that is also informed by an advice from IOPA. Um, and when I was speaking to this in Seattle, we were still waiting for the Parliament to actually reach an agreement, because in the absence of one of the three having a common agreement, they cannot start negotiations. And the good news is that Parliament reached an agreement before summer, and so the negotiations between the three, so the Council representing the Member States, the Commission and the European Parliament, have started. We call that trilogues. And I can clearly see a true ambition in all three institutions to also wrap this one up before we have elections in Europe. And that concretely means that they have to come to a final document, merging the three into one, by March. Now, when that will happen, I hear mixed signals. I hear that the current Spanish presidency really wants to yeah, that is a reason for music, I would say that, for sure. We are getting there. But yeah, so either the Spanish presidency wraps it up, they really want to. Belgian presidency starting 1st of Jan stands ready to take over if needed. I have faith in both, also my colleagues who are very helpful in that process. So I think we will have a reviewed Solvency II, is my assumption, in the beginning of next year. Now, what does that mean? It means, I would say, that there will be changes, but they will not be tremendous. There will be changes, particularly to Pillar 1, to the quantitative part. I think it will mean a certain level of easing. As a supervisor, as IOPA, we actually said that for long term, some easing would be fair, would be appropriate, and still be also still be prudentially sound. Let's hope they listen to that and don't move beyond the long term. But in the end, this is now in the hands of supervisors. Of institutions, of the politicians. So let's see what comes out, but some easing will be there, but not tremendous changes to the framework. The rest of the change of Solvency II very much relates to more to macroeconomic requirements on liquidity, for example, sustainability being incorporated, etc., less relevant for the ICS. Now, you can imagine that while this is ongoing, we constantly monitor where the current Solvency II stands, where the probably new Solvency II stands, and how that relates to Solvency II and to the ICS. And I think we are pretty confident that the ICS being a minimum harmonized standard, we will be able to propose Solvency II as it is, but also as it will be once changed, as an implementation of the ICS, and ask the IAIS to come and assess that. Now, partly that is also because we reached an agreement in EXCO to also recognize the fact that in Solvency II, part of getting as close as we can as supervisors to the actual risk profile of the insurers is to do that through internal models. In Solvency II, the standard formula is definitely a complicated model, but if you are a very large group, it sometimes is even better if your risk profile is really modeled in a way that it really fits with the risk profile you're actually taking. Having that in it made a tremendous difference in how we see the process going forward. So that was a very welcome decision. And with that, maybe also from me to say that there is a lot of work going on. There's a lot of data being provided. In the end, it really is that data that you deliver that helps us moving forward. And there are those, and you're in the room, but you're also elsewhere in the world, that really deliver on this, that really make this effort to continuously provide us with information to do this technical assessment in an ICS context, but very much also Gary, who I can say with his team is making a tremendous effort to really show how the AM works. We can only do that with data, and we can only work on an ICS with data. So, and that means that I want to really thank those who submit the data. And I also want to say that those who don't, or do not yet do enough, it really also helps you to get to an informed worldwide standard that also, you always tell me we need more harmonization at the international level, where here it is, that will help us inform this process and finalize this process in, I think, a tremendously important year. So I know it's a lot of effort. I appreciate it. Just hang in there one more year. And then we definitely can get there, because we're, I think, good on track.
Yes, thank you very much, Petra, and thank you for these words. I think that's very important to flag. And of course, we are more than happy to welcome new participants to our data collection, and that's certainly both important for the work that we do, but I think it has also a very huge benefit for those participating in terms of their understanding of what we do, the ability to provide technical input to our work informed by data. So with that, it's not I am running out of questions. I have plenty again of questions, but I think it's time to give a reward to those who are in the room and stay in the room for this last panel and give them an opportunity to ask, to be the moderator and ask questions to our panelists. So I would like to take one or two questions from the audience. I see.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Angus Scorgi. I represent Insurance Europe. So I just want to say thanks for the update. The European insurance industry certainly welcomes the inclusion of internal models. But perhaps it was a bit unsurprising because ICP 17 currently explicitly supports it notes that the IAIS currently explicitly supports internal models. However, in your revision to ICP 17, that language has been removed. So I was just wondering if you could give us an explanation as to why the explicit support for internal models has been removed from the ICP, but included in the ICS. Thanks.
Okay, let's take maybe some more questions. Oh, I mean, I'm happy to answer the question if you want. Okay, so first of all, this is not directly related to the ICS. So in the ICS, I think it's very clear what we have done, and in the candidate ICS as a PCR, we have internal models subject to requirements and approval by, and that's what we have been consulted upon. And of course, we are now looking at the comments we have received from stakeholders on that. In parallel, we are also doing the work to review the ICPs, ICP 14 and ICP 17. And we have been having in parallel a consultation on ICP 14 and 17. So on the ICP 17, we do recognize that there's a possibility to use internal model, etc., under a certain set of criteria requirement, which actually we have built upon for the inclusion in the ICS. So, I mean, of course, all of that needs to go through resolution of comments and then formal adoption. That will happen in 2024 in Cape Town. So we will not only celebrate the adoption of the ICS, but also the revised ICP 14 and 17. But it's not what we have put forward for consultation in ICP 17 does not remove the possibility to use internal model within the context of the ICPs. Shall we take, oh, I see another question.
Hi, Hugh Francis, Aviva. I thought we'd be disappointed, Vicky, if I didn't ask you a question on your last time. In relation to a lot of the industry feedback, it's focused very much on implementation. In terms of next steps, you're smiling, Patrick, because you knew I was going to ask this. How do you envisage that on the one hand you have a very detailed, prescriptive ICS, which has lots of detail in it. There's a recognition on implementation element that you want to take into account specific market characteristics. So my two questions are, how are you looking to bridge that? i.e., how will you practically embed within ComFrame ICS such that you could envisage that there's some flexibility to take into account those market characteristics? And I suppose the second element of that, and it may be to come after approval, is how do you envisage that? You mentioned the assessment be done by by IAIS about local jurisdictions who may choose to suggest that their local jurisdiction complies with that. How do you envisage that's going to happen, such that both yourselves and ourselves, ultimately, if we have an FSAP review from the IMF, can be confident that what we do complies with ICS in the way that we think it should?
Shall we take the response now, or you want to? Yeah, Shigeru, you want to?
Sure. I think this is. I think that's a very good question, and we need to think through about how do we actually do the implementation assessment. But I can assure it will be a robust and structured approach that we will take on the assessment, implementation assessment itself. Of course, we can't do I think it's the same with FSAP. They will visit each country and then measure you against certain standards and see if they are compliant with that. But I think it's the same with the ICS, actually, because we can't do, okay, from this date, we will do the assessment for all jurisdictions. So it will be a staggered approach in any context that we do the implementation assessment. And in doing so, I think one of the things will be important is we will do an economic impact analysis which looks at what the impact will be in a qualitative manner. And also probably we need to have some time, as you mentioned, to take some time required to actually move into the actual assessment itself. So there will be some transition period, and there will be a staggered approach in how do we actually conduct the implementation assessment. But in any case, I think we need to really think through about how the implementation assessment will take place as we finalize the current ICS. So let me stop there. If that's
okay. Thank you very much, Shigeru. Are there any other questions? Well, I see none, so I think that's really speaks about the quality of the answers that you you provided to my questions and the clarity that you have shared on the work and the progress we made and the steps ahead. So let me thank you very much, my panelists, for that. It's been a pleasure. And I would not want to end this panel, the last mile of this annual conference, which is always the most difficult, without expressing a special thanks to Vicky. Of course, everyone has had the opportunity to say a few words and to you, but let me just thank you very much for your leadership in driving the ICS from the field testing period to the Kuala Lumpur agreement and then Abu Dhabi agreement and then the monitoring period. And also, I may try to use my privilege of being a moderator to speak a little bit more in terms of the personal pleasure and reward I have had to serve you. So thank you very much, Vicky. And I wish you all the best for the future, and I really hope that our path will cross again.